Sweet. So the conversation piece this week were wrestling what ifs. In my brain, what I wanted to do with this was the biggest wrestling what ifs we could come up with. From what if McMahon didn't buy WCW to, all kinds of things. I want you guys to tell me your biggest what ifs. I've got a few from TikTok that I'll read like last week. Chat, give us a couple that you guys might have. Who wants to go first?
Me.
Okay.
All right. So this is a big one.
Just right off the rip, pull the Band-Aid.
What if the Von Erichs weren't cursed and they were all still alive?
That's a very, very good question. The three of us kind of discussed this last night while we were watching the Prestige Wrestling show, which, by the way, if you haven't seen Prestige Roseland, check that out after you watch this. It was a great show.
One of my favorite indie shows. They do quarterly pretty much. And
yeah,
always kill it.
Dude, the main event, Kevin Blackwood, Masato Tanaka. Woo, that match was crazy.
They beat the shit out of each other, bro.
Yeah, they did. But I think we all kind of came into the agreement that if the Von Erich tragedy as a whole never happened, they'd be the biggest family in wrestling.
Completely agreed. 1,000% over.
Yeah. I feel like the bloodline story would be like their kids fighting for dominance.
Mm-hmm.
I think there would have been a lot more Von Erichs currently wrestling than the two that are currently on the indies and working in Ring of Honor. I feel like looking at that as a whole, that whole situation, like the chain wouldn't have stopped. Like if they weren't cursed, Kerry would have never had the motorcycle accident. His Intercontinental title run probably could have been a world heavyweight title run.
Yes.
David probably would have ended up with the title. Kevin probably would have ended up with a title reign of some sort. Their run as the 6-man tag champions. Like, you think of everything they did and what they could have done if they didn't each have something terrible happen at their peaks.
Right. I think the WWE landscape as a whole, even if Kerry was still like the only one that did anything like big in the WWE, I think it would be it would look drastically different. I think with more Von Erich influence in WWE's history, I think it would be like a vastly different landscape.
If the Texas tornado didn't have his foot injury.
Yes.
And by that, they listed it as an ankle and a foot injury, even though the poor man didn't have a foot.
He lost half of his foot.
Yeah. Like the fact that he was still able to go in there and do what he did. Imagine if he was quite literally at 100%. You know what I mean? Like Kerry Von Erich could have been one of the greatest to ever do it if he didn't go down the road that he went down with drugs, alcohol, and then the accident. Like you look at what happened with David. If David didn't have that fluke accident and end up sick, like he could have been a world champion. They were ready to put the 10 pounds of gold on him.
Well, here's my theory. I don't think David would have ever wrestled because he only started wrestling because Kerry died.
No.
You're thinking of the youngest.
Oh,
David,
sorry.
Yeah.
I mixed them up. The youngest one. The youngest one wouldn't have wrestled.
No, agreed. 1,000%. He wouldn't have wrestled. Kerry had never.
Yeah.
But they left out one of the brothers, and there's all in the movie, whatever you want to look at, like talking about the movie separate. I think if it had never happened, David would have won the 10 pounds of gold. Kerry would have had a much more substantial WWE run than he did, and then Kevin would have been a mainstay in the Texas Independence and the NWA, and World Class would have never shut down. They would have never sold to Jerry Jarrett. Like, I think if all that shit had never happened, World Class could have absorbed Memphis, and we would be looking at a much bigger, different picture in independent wrestling if World Class had eaten Memphis and not Memphis eating Texas.
Yeah, basically like World Class, they would have stayed around, would basically kind of in a way be what TNA is.
Essentially, yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Like they would have been the big, if they had been able to stick around, they would have easily have been the biggest competitor out. It would have been WWE, Jim Crockett Promotions, and World Class would have been the big three. And
For sure.
you know, that would have been the perfect way to look at it. WWE, AEW, TNA. If you go back then, WWF, Jim Crockett Promotions, and World Class would have exactly what it would have been.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Husky, you got one for me?
Oh yeah, I've got a good list here, but this one popped into my head when you first asked me to come on the show. We all know about the original plans for the Shield. It was supposed to be Jon Moxley, Seth Rollins, and Chris Hero. What if that plan actually went through as written and Roman Reigns was never a part of the Shield?
Whew.
They still would have continued to try to shove Roman down everyone's throats, I think, just in a different perspective.
I almost disagree completely. I think the Shield is what saved Roman's career. I think without the Shield, we would have never seen a little bit of the Roman we have now, because we saw that little bit of the big dog Roman and the head of the table Roman in the Shield. And when the Shield broke up, he floundered for 7.5 years trying to find himself. Yeah. I think if the Shield never happened and Roman was never, or if Roman in the Shield never happened, Roman in the WWE would not be where it is today.
He would just be in the mid card somewhere.
He would at very best, if in the company at all.
Yeah.
Because I think if it wasn't that immediate connection to Moxley and to Seth Rollins for that whole time as being a member of the Shield is what kept him on the island of irrelevancy, ironically. You know what I mean? Without that connection through all that shit, like, would we have given a fuck? Like, dog food Roman? Like, would we have given a shit about dog food Roman if he wasn't Seth Rollins' tag team partner and hadn't been turned on?
Fuck no.
You know what I mean? Like, that's the point. Like, none of that shit would have mattered. He would have just been another mid-card guy. He would have been this is going to sound, I don't want to say this and sound bad. He would have been another Samoan in a tag team.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what WWE did with him. And I say that respectfully, and we all know that. You know what I mean? WWE historically, if you look like someone else, they're probably going to try to put you in a tag team to get you over.
Right.
So on the Roman train, just kind of like a caveat to that, like a sidestep, what if he didn't have cancer and actually had a career in the NFL? Because it was during his physical for the Vikings that they found the cancer. So what if he had actually, because he was really good at Georgia Tech, wasn't he?
He was good enough to get to the league, which in my opinion means there's 32 teams with 53-man rosters, and he was good enough to be on one of those rosters. So in my opinion, you have to be pretty fucking good at football to make the NFL in any capacity.
100%. Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
So, like, do you think that he would have stayed in football?
I think he would have given it a few years in the NFL. I think he would have given it like an honest effort at it. And then if for some reason it didn't work out, I think he may have eventually ended up in wrestling. But I think he would have given football a longer shot.
I 1,000% agree, and I'll even take it one step further and even goes so far to call it. Roman would have been a historical, what is known in the NFL as a 2-contract player. You sign your rookie deal, and then you sign one more contract, and then you're done. That's all you get. And there's a ton of NFL players throughout history that are 2-contract players, and that's fine. Most of the time, you can make enough money in 2 contracts to never have to work again.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yeah. If you're good with money,
he would have been a 2-contract player, and then Roman would have probably, like you said, he would have ended up in wrestling anyways. Will you open that door, please? She's going to rip through that at this rate. Like, I made it this far. Like, I'm gonna kill her. Not really. You're a bad dog, Penny.
She just doesn't want to be part of the show.
She wants to be a part of the show. I know. She's just such a handful lately. Hi. Hi. Oh. Oh, hi. What are you doing?
Well, what's yours?
Mine?
Yours.
Okay. So mine is a big one. I'm going to start with my big one. In 2001, everybody knows that before McMahon signed the contract to buy WCW, Eric Bischoff was in the process of getting a financier team together to purchase it himself. What do we think the landscape of pro wrestling would look like if Eric Bischoff had been the one to buy WCW and not Vince McMahon, Shane McMahon?
I think they would have maybe made it 2 more years, and then Vince would have still bought them. Because honestly, with the trajectory of the storylines and how it was going in the first place, I don't think that they would have made it past 2 more years.
You think there was a reason why Ted Turner didn't want anything to do with them anymore?
Yes.
Husky, what do you think?
I can see that. I can also see Jerry Jarrett getting involved too.
Ooh.
While that time starting out where Bischoff's just tanking it, apparently, have Jerry Jarrett come out and there'd be no TNA, but it would just be under the WCW name. So you would get, Styles, Joe, Daniels under the WCW moniker.
That is crazy to think about, okay? Because using that as the segue, so Eric Bischoff buys the company, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Scouse says he disagrees. He thinks Bischoff would have cut a lot of the massive contracts and essentially restarted, but he could have done it the right way, because think about some of that undercard talent that they had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking of banking on a Jerry Jarrett and a Jeff Jarrett interference play, and instead of getting TNA, we got WCW with those guys booking it and Eric Bischoff being the bag to finance the company.
Yeah.
Look at it like this. You would have had people like Abyss, and you would have had AJ Styles, and you would have had Christopher Daniels, and you would have had so many of these really young TNA guys already, because some of those guys started in WCW and they were dark match, undercard, and midcard talent. You know what I mean? They were jobbers, like the IWC likes to say.
Yeah. AJ Styles was already there.
Yeah. He was literally under WCW contract, and WWF fired him.
Which is insane to think about, that WWE fired AJ Styles.
Oh, okay.
And then a year and a half down, or 15, 16 years down the line, he's your top champion. That's just wild to think about.
That's what I'm saying. Like, looking at what they would have had and all the guys that started TNA, and think about when Angle left in 04 or whatever, when he got to TNA. You think about the fact that Ron the Truth Killings would have never had to have left. You know what I mean? Because if he would have pretty much went WWF, WCW, TNA, and you know what I mean? Like, he would have never gone anywhere else.
Yeah, he'd have stayed in WCW, and they would have put the top title on him.
He would have been the guy. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many, like, so much that would have happened. Bryan Danielson, like, the trajectory of the fact that if there was another major player in WCW, you know what I mean? If Bryan Danielson, instead of going to Ring of Honor, could have ended up in WCW in those early 2000s when he left Shawn Michaels' school.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, there would have been more places for him to go than just Ring of Honor. Like,
oh, for sure, yeah.
It would have changed everything, I think, if WCW had stuck around.
I've got another one that kind of ties into this, but not WCW. What if ECW stuck around?
Dude, I did a thing with Ritter way back when in like 2021, and we did an episode similar to this back when we were still audio only, and he and I talked about it. And my question for him was, what if Paul Lee had gotten that TNN TV deal and WWE didn't undercut him on it? You know what I mean? If they didn't have the mole, if they didn't have all that history that's come out where we know people from ECW's camp was going to WWE and giving them information on the TV deal so that WWE could undercut it. Like if that had never happened, ECW would have been a mainstay in pro wrestling in that number 3 spot pretty much indefinitely.
ECW would be what Ring of Honor was.
Exactly. Zero questions. We wouldn't. If this would have been one of those butterfly effects, though, if ECW had stuck around, we probably wouldn't get XPW. We probably wouldn't have the current version of GCW. Jersey Championship Wrestling probably would have never happened.
Combat Zone wouldn't have happened.
Yep.
Hell, maybe if the butterfly effect goes out, maybe AEW wouldn't even be a thing.
That's what I'm saying. Like ECW sticking around may be bigger than WCW in a lot of ways for that reason alone, is because the amount of people that wouldn't have needed to leave out of that Northeast Pennsylvania area. You know what I mean? That Philadelphia, like New Jersey, New York area. Those people would have never had to have left to go to other companies. Again, much like WCW, the amount of talent they had to build it, if they had gotten that big TV deal, no doubt they could have been an easy number 3 promotion still to this day.
Yeah, like because there was that thing that they did on the network a while back. It was the ECW thing is Joey Styles and Paul Heyman doing that, and they talked about, you know, what was the reason that ECW died, and he was talking about like didn't have like a proper like advertising company and like, you know, not getting the TV deal and stuff like that. And he asked like, what newer talent would we have seen in ECW? And he mentioned names like, he threw out like Dolph Ziggler would be one, Punk, Bryan Danielson. There were a few other ones that he named. I think he said Seth Rollins too. I think he mentioned Seth.
Think about all those IWA Mid-South guys after that wrestled with Ian Rotten after ECW folded.
Oh, yeah.
All of those guys would have stayed in Philadelphia at the 2300, and they would have all continued to wrestle.
Yeah, like you would see all the dudes that were like big in like CZW, like your Nick Gage, your Matt Tremont, your Drake Younger, like all those dudes would all be under the ECW banner.
100%. They would be in the Hardcore Hall of Fame would be 1,000 times bigger than it is. And it all goes back. And it, you know, like I jokingly said it the other night when we were watching the, this is perfect timing, Dad Hat. We were just talking about something I know you would love to be a part of. Necro Butcher, perfect. We're doing Wrestling What Ifs, Dad Hat. And right now what we're talking about is what if ECW had stuck around and they got the TNN deal and they never folded and got bought out by WWE. You just missed mine, which was what if WCW got bought by Eric Bischoff instead of Vince McMahon. Necro Butcher, exactly. The amount of talent that was wrestling for ECW and was coming in and out of that territory was unreal. They, again, much like I was saying, if WCW would have stayed that number 2 competitor forever, TNA would have never happened. ECW could have very well had flown in as that number 3 guy. And if we had WWE, WCW, and ECW still in 2018, Ring of Honor and AEW may have never happened. There would have been no need for them to happen because the people who started them would be working elsewhere.
Yeah, all of those dudes, like all of the elite dudes, like Kenny, the Bucks, Hangman, they would all go to what if Kevin Nash is the best booker of all time? I mean, he even showed it in TNA, brother. He was the highest selling champion of all time, you know. When Hogan was on top, everything was down, brother.
Ooh, what if Chris Jericho was the one to have bought WCW?
Oh shit.
Anonymous gifter gifted off the top a 1-month sub. And we've got 2 gifts. Thank you, Anonymous. We love you. Thank you.
Thank you.
But
that is interesting. If Jericho would have bought WCW.
Yeah.
Oh, what if Sting?
That was going to be my next one.
Mm-hmm.
Jericho buying WCW, in my opinion, at that point in 01 is a little bit of a stretch. Knowing that it got bought for essentially the catalog and $2 million, Jericho may have been able to afford it, but that would have left that kid at nothing because Jericho wasn't a 7-figure wrestler yet. He signed his first $1 million contract with WWE. So if he had never left WWE, he may have had the $3 million to buy the company and to do everything he needed, but you'll talk about a hair fucking tight budget after that. That kid would have been sitting on E.
Oh, he would have been working 3 jobs to recoup all that money he lost buying that company if he did.
Let's do this one next, and then Al, you got another one for us? You got one more?
I do have one more.
All right. So what if Sting instead of Hogan joined the NWO? So historically, we know Bash 96, the Outsiders come out. There's supposed to be a third man. Who is the third man? You know what I mean? Like, what would have happened if Sting was the third man? The only issue with that story, Scows, is if Lex joined instead of Hogan, Lex would have had to turn in the middle of the match. Lex was on the team with Macho Man and Sting. Yeah. So like it would have been Hogan, Lex, and Macho Man against Sting and the Outsiders. I guess we could replace Lex with the Outsiders as well.
Yeah.
I guess that could have been it. I think what would have made it bigger for Sting, though, is Sting was a WCW guy. That's what would have made that the Sting make it burn a little bit more, is the fact that the Outsiders came in and converted Mr. WCW. It would have went to 3-on-2 to 3-on-2. I completely agree. 100% yes. But I think what is more important to remember about that is that's what I'm saying with the Sting thing. Both Hogan and both Lex Luger had ties to the Outsiders already through WWE. Sting was a WCW guy through and through. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? If he turned his back on WCW to join the Outsiders, I think that would have been one of those huge, oh, fuck.
That would have shook the fucking landscape completely.
Oh, yeah. Al, what do you think? If it was Sting instead of Hogan in the NWO?
I don't think it would have lasted as long.
You don't think it would have been as big?
No, because Hogan, again, was still kind of everything to everyone then.
That is a very valid point, too.
I think it would have fizzled off or would have felt forced.
Sting had multiple heel turns in his career. Hogan only had one that mattered. Yeah. And that's the perfect way to remember it is fuck Terry. But the night that happened and he dropped that leg drop after being a baby face for over 20 years, it was a huge ordeal for him because he did it to his best friend. Him and Macho Man had sold out arenas working together and working against each other for the last 10 or 15 years, depending on who's telling the version of the history at the time. So for him to turn on his best friends and go against the company, because again, you think about the steroid trials and the whole Hogan versus McMahon bullshit. He left WWE because he couldn't stand Vince. Remember? That was the whole thing. It was a big deal. Fuck Terry. But the leg drop still mattered in '96 when he turned and he dropped it on Macho Man. It was a big deal.
I agree with what Scal says, though, because Sting's career took off because he went against them. You know what I mean? I don't think
revitalized his career.
Sting.
I think Sting's career, he won his first NWA title before the NWA. I wouldn't say his career took off. I think his career took off again because of Flair.
It was a resurgence. Yeah,
it was definitely the resurgence. Dropping from the thing is like Shawn Michaels coming back in 01. Sting has now had 3 separate careers. He had his the Surfer Sting run where he won a world title. He had NWO Crow Sting where he won world titles. And now he has crazy old man Sting where he just climbs to whatever he can and jumps off of it because he's fucking Sting.
Well, dude, 4. He had 4. TNA.
Oh yeah, the TNA fucking crazy Joker Sting. Sting has more active timelines than the fucking the Halloween franchise does.
100%.
He's a real life walking anomaly. This man has multiple timelines.
He really is.
Sting is Michael Myers.
Sting is wrestling's Michael Myers. He's got like 4 different timelines.
It's true. It's true. Oh.
But if he never becomes Crow Sting, the rest does not happen. You're absolutely right. The resurgence is what saved him. But I think Sting was already a made man Hall of Fame career before then. And I'm a Sting contrarian. I think, in my opinion, like, here, can I go next, Al? Can I go since we're talking about Sting? I have one. Okay, I'm sorry. But what if the WWF in the 80s said, you know what? Sorry, Jim Hellwig, you're just not our guy. We're going to go with Steve Borland instead. And what if WWF picked him over the Dingo Warrior and then, because they only had room for one big man, and they picked the Dingo Warrior over Steve Borland? What if WWF had picked Steve Borland in the early 80s and brought Sting over to WWF, and Sting never happened? What if he became Michael Stang and he drive like a fucking Corvette to the ring or something? You know what I mean? Michael Stang.
I still think the Sting name would have stuck with him. I think we would have gotten the ultimate dream match that people have been clamoring for years. We would have got Sting and Taker. While they were still in their prime. Yeah, instead of Sting and Seth. Yeah.
I think we should have to.
Or whatever that hot dog shit was with Sting and Triple H.
All right. Sorry, Al. Back to you. So, me and us conducted this entire section.
This is going to be a large can of worms.
Oh, those are my favorite. This will be the perfect way to end this segment, too, before we go into the watch-along.
Okay. So this would change. This one small thing would change all of WWE as we know it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
What if Triple H had never cheated on Chyna with Stephanie McMahon, and him and Chyna stayed together, and him and Stephanie never got married?
Wow.
That's a spicy one.
That's a spicy meatball. Holy shit.
That's
okay.
Huge.
Let me peel the first layer of this onion back then. All right. Let's just start this conversation. Stephanie never left Test to be with Hunter. Do we think Test would be running the company in 2025 if she had never left it for Hunter?
No.
Do we think her and Test would still be together if she had never left him for Hunter?
No.
Probably not.
Sorry, Test. R.I.P.
Andrew Martin.
At the same time, we're both like, R.I.P. bro. Yeah, Stephanie ended up with the Macho Man. God damn it, AJ.
Oh,
bro. Wow. Allegedly. Right?
Yeah. I love when they asked Lanny Poffo about that. He's like, there's 2 people that know about that. One's dead and the other ain't talking.
So let's start
That's
down.
the closest we'll ever get to saying that it happened.
So let's start down the first road. Where do you think WWE would be if Triple H was not married to Stephanie?
Somebody else would be in that position. Easy. That's the quick.
Do you think Stephanie would be there?
I think Stephanie would still be gone because the bigger piece of this puzzle is Vince was always going to Vince. So I don't think Stephanie's roles overall probably would change very much because Stephanie would still be Stephanie McMahon. I think Hunter's life would be very different.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would ultimately be a huge one. He would still be a world champion. DX would have still revolutionized wrestling in the late 90s and early 2000s. But I don't think he would be the game changer. Maybe he would be doing NXT instead of Shawn. You know what I mean? Maybe he would have been able to move up to do that.
I think the roles would be reversed.
What do you mean?
I think Shawn would be running WWE. Triple H would be running NXT.
Wow. What if Vince was convicted on the steroid trial and not there for years? What happens to business during that time, and how would it change, and how now? See, that's one of those, like, we could spend an entire episode, like if Vince left the company in the 90s because of the steroid trials. I think more importantly, too, if we look at the fact, just segueing back before we dive too deep into dad hats, if we look at the China situation, I think, one, most importantly, Joni would still be alive.
100%.
I don't think she would have went down the path of the depression and stuff that she went through if that. We said it during the Triple H episode when we were talking about his career, Al. That was when you and Bo historically went on your rant about how Stephanie McMahon Helmsley is a homewrecker.
She absolutely is.
And that was, in my opinion, that's the catalyst. We have the tape of Russo, Vince Russo, on our show for my interview, saying that he thinks the reason why China isn't with us today is because of Vince and the WWE. All right, love you, Dad. Have a good night at work, Bubba.
AJ's right. She wouldn't have been with the X-Pac, so his career wouldn't have been ruined by that whole situation. I mean, it wasn't ruined, but like, he's got a mark on him. I definitely think her still being like, I feel like the women's revolution would have happened a lot sooner than it did had she been around. I think that the women's division would be way further along than it is now if she never got shipped away.
If she didn't get, essentially, if she wasn't made to go to TNA and to New Japan and all of those because WWE wasn't using her or booking her, if she had stayed in Connecticut, then I think the women's division, WWE has the best women's division with the exception of a little run by TNA in the last few years. They've safely had the best women's division in wrestling pretty much ever.
Right.
If China was still around and she had never left, then I 100% also think that if she had never left WWE, the women's division would be light years ahead of where it's at now. Hi, Penny.
Yeah, I completely agree.
All right. You guys ready to watch